thank you for being here. I know a lot of you are from religion classes, and I see colleagues who teach across campus here as well, and I thank you for making it here on a very bleak, rainy, cold, strangely cold April day at the very end of the semester. Congratulations to you for doing that. I'd like to just introduce my colleagues here. In the Department of Religion, we have a real sense of both the importance of world religions, so that students can understand the breadth and the function of religion in societies around the globe. And also we have a new focus more on religion, society, and religion and politics. So you'll see that in some of the specializations that I discussed tonight as I introduce people. My name is Dorothy Rogers, as you know, and I actually cross both fields, philosophy and religion. I teach philosophy of religion, ethics, religion and politics. Right now I'm teaching a course on religion and women. And next spring, I hope to teach a course on religion and law if we get enough students interested. Okay, I'll keep you posted on that. And the sanctuary movement, by the way, we had a session on that, a very interesting discussion, because that actually has roots in religion in the Old Testament, and then again among religious progressives in the 1980s. Things you didn't know, right? So that's what our department as a whole focuses on, but I'd like to introduce each colleague as well, and I will start to my right. Dr. John Sabosley is an assistant professor who joined us this year. He earned his PhD from the University of California in Santa Barbara. And his research interests include comparative study of religious violence. He actually will be teaching a course on religious violence next fall. And the relationship between religion and the state in an increasingly interconnected global society. John teaches courses such as Death, Dying, and the Afterlife, Religion and Culture, and Religion and Politics. He recently co-authored the book God and the Tumult of the Global Square with Mark Juergensmeyer and Dinah Grigo, and was published by the University of California Press. That was 2015. To my left is Dr. Mark Clatterbuck, who is an associate professor who received his PhD in Religion and Culture from Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. His primary research area is Native North American encounter with Christianity. He teaches courses including Native American religions, religious experience, interreligious encounters, and Christian liberation theologies, as well as introduction to religion. His latest book project is Crow Jesus, First-Person Narratives of Native American Religious Belonging, which was published just this year. We have a copy in the office now. And he's also author of Demons, Saints, and Patriots, The Catholic Visions of Native America, 1902 to 1962. And I might add that Dr. Clatterbuck has a very strong interest in environmentalism and was one of the people who drove out to Standing Rock, a 26-hour drive last August to contribute to the protest and participate in it, and has had interviews online about his interest in environmentalism and religion. Dr. Lisa Vail, to Mark's left, is an assistant professor who received her PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. Her research interests include the heads of religious groups and monasteries, as well as Hindu religious poets of the Bhakti devotional traditions. The multidimensional way in which yogis, saints, and monks see themselves and are seen by their communities allows them to fulfill many functions: administrators, divinity incarnate, selfless exemplars, political movers and shakers. She teaches courses such as Religions of the World, Asian Religions, Asian Religious Texts, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism. She also teaches Death, Dying, and Afterlife. They're taking turns now, and mysticism and spirituality. Not able to be with us tonight is Dr. Yasir Ibrahim. He's an associate professor who received his PhD in Islamic Studies from Princeton University, and his research includes the study of modern religious reform movements in Islam. He's especially well-versed in 19th century liberal interpretations of Islam. Yes, they were out there. Liberal religion was in the ether at the time. Protestants, Catholics, Jews, and Muslims were all looking at more liberal interpretations of religion. And he teaches courses such as Islamic religious traditions, Introduction to the Quran, Islam in the Contemporary World, Jihad, Just War, and the Prospect of Peace, and Islamic Ethics and Law. He will be teaching, he's teaching Quran now, and next fall he will teach a course on spirituality and mysticism, looking at the Sufi tradition within Islam. And his publications include articles in the journals Studia Islamica and Journal of Islamic Studies. With us in a few moments as she returns from class with students here with her, it's a seminar, so we won't need too many extra student seats, is Dr. Kate Timony. Kate Timony is also an assistant professor who joined us this year, and she earned her PhD from Florida State University. Her research interests include human rights, genocide, and just war tradition, Buddhist applied ethics, and Jewish applied ethics. She teaches courses such as Religion and Genocide, the Holocaust, which is the class she's coming from tonight, Comparative Religious Ethics, Religions of the World, and African Religions, which she'll teach next fall. Her most recent publications include The D is Silent, but Human Rights Are Not, Dango Unchained as Human Rights Discourse. And she also is going to host a genocide workshop this summer on Montclair State's campus with visiting faculty from the region. So I'd like you to welcome our esteemed colleagues, and I'd like to start to open. And I'd like to actually open the discussion with a question that most people think of, no matter what their discipline, if they're academics like we are, teaching in universities and colleges. But the question is, why this subject? Why religion for each of you? And what is it that drew you to the study of religion? I've shared with my colleagues that I studied religion because I grew up unreligious. Nothing. We went to church maybe 3 times when I was a child, and it was just strange, and they asked for money, and my mom didn't like that, so we never went back. And I remember at about the age of 12, I felt very curious about what this world was, that I'd hear people on television talking about religion, and they knew so much. And my neighbor's dad converted to Jehovah's Witness, so they didn't celebrate holidays anymore. And it just became very interesting to me, and that sort of took me on a path of participating in religion, going to a religious school, undergrad college, and then studying religion and philosophy as a graduate student. So it was really, what's that mystery out there? I don't know if I actually feel that mystery as a spiritual person. I don't think I'm terribly spiritual, but I'm very interested in other people's spirituality. I'm like, ooh, let's read about this. What is this all about? So I've mentioned this to my colleagues. We talk about these kind of things in the hall, and I'm interested in hearing from whoever wants to volunteer first. Keep it nice and informal.
This is about
why religion? Why study religion?
So this story may sound familiar to some of you. I started my undergraduate career majoring in X, and then I ended up majoring in X. Right? So I started off as a psych major because I was very interested in what motivated humans. You know, what makes people tick. And I was going to become a psychiatrist. So I was actually in a med school track as well. And so as I started to progress throughout my undergraduate career, as I hope will be the case with many of you as well, I ran into or took a class with a professor that really inspired me. And so the reason why I ended up studying religion and becoming a religion and psych double major, and the reason why I was attracted to it, is because I was interested in not only what makes people tick, but also about what influences their behavior. So what motivates them beyond just the human brain, also things like ideas of the sacred and ideas about how the world functions and about how humans function in that world. And so the field of religion really allowed me to understand the human experience in a way that I felt as though other disciplines wouldn't allow me to study that kind of motivation. So I could look at not only this worldly concerns, but other worldly concerns. I could look at the profane as well as the sacred. And so I felt as though it gave me an opportunity to really understand what makes people tick, looking at every single discipline and its and tools that were available to me. So that field really ended up attracting me.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that because I have a very similar experience, thank you. I also I had a number of majors of my undergraduate career, but I landed in philosophy. And I liked philosophy because it got to the undercurrent of everything. Understanding any part of the world requires some understanding of logic, some understanding of rationale. And the more work I did in philosophy, the more interested I got in issues of religious philosophy. And I started studying the early Christian heresies. And And one of the things that shocked me when I was studying early Christianity was that the kinds of theological doctrines that are coming out of the early centuries of Christianity, I thought just came naturally. I thought they were just further, deeper readings of Scripture. But what I found was political structures, particularly Constantine the emperor, had a lot to say about what theologies were accepted and was part of the urgency to unite behind one single idea. And once I realized that, I started looking at how politics can affect religion. And once I started there, I couldn't go back. And what I found was the same things that I liked about philosophy, how it required me to engage with multiple disciplines and multiple trajectories all at once, was even deeper in religion. Because those that don't study religion tend to neglect the religious aspect. They tend to neglect the most dominant forces in people's lives. So religion to me became a way to understand and explore the world that, like Kate said, didn't miss anything. It took everything into consideration and tried to make sense of it all as one piece. And so I like being able to read about a lot of different things and come to nuanced and complex understandings. And once I got started down that road, I just continued on through many years until I landed here.
Thankfully you did.
Thankfully I did, yeah. I'm thrilled.
Yeah, there's some similarities both with Dr. Timoni's comments and Dr. Sabozli's about, for me, trying to understand sort of the influence that religion has in shaping the way people see the world and live in it. And for me, it was it started really early on and was fairly personal, just because I was raised in a unlike Dr. Rogers, I was raised in a deeply religious community. And it was a fundamentalist Pentecostal Christian community. And religion dominated our lives. And I mean, every aspect of our lives. And I mean, it's how I understood history, sort of the unfolding of history, that we were taught a very clear timeline of world events. And, you know, that I was expecting any day that the rapture would take place after the certain events happened, that the rapture would take place and the beast would return and would arise, and then Jesus would return, and there'd be a tribulation and Armageddon, and sort of the way world history was laid out. That was just ingrained in us. And issues of health. I mean, I really mean everything. Like faith healing was a significant part of my experience growing up. You pray for everything. And you know, you get a cut. Well, Mom, I think I need stitches. I think we need to pray. Like, Mom, I really think I need stitches. Wow, just a prayer. So I mean, every aspect of life. I mean, even like as mundane as it is, like sports figures that I was interested in. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm an Orioles fan. And the players I most liked were the ones who went to the local Pentecostal church, Scott McGregor and Dippy Martinez, not because they were the best players, but because, you know, played soccer with their kids or whatever. And so really that fascination of the way religion shapes how religious communities and individuals, again, see the world and live out their experience in the world has just always fascinated me. Even though I've moved far from some of the tradition I grew up in, that interest has continued.
So we all have areas where we kind of cross over this. You know, I grew up on a college campus in rural Virginia, and it was right when the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court case was happening when I was in second grade. No more public schools. I had to go to a private academy, Worsham Academy, and in church buildings. And I was kind of a little too young to really know what was going on, but I knew that there was a lot of racial prejudice in the area. And I went to, as a child, I mean, my parents actually, when I was born, was in Birmingham, Alabama. And they went to their parents' Baptist church. So I didn't get baptized as a Christian until I was 12 when I joined the church, which was a Protestant church on that college campus in Virginia. My parents are both kind of academic. My father was a chemist. He became a college administrator, a dean, and a president finally, and he's now almost 94. still going. My mother's a writer and singer, very creative person. So I'm thrilled to have both of them as parents. I feel like they gave me a breadth and a depth and a sense of the beauties of art and, poetry and religion, and also a sense of very powerful, they both grew up during the Depression, so a very powerful sense of Protestant work ethic. This church was a Presbyterian church, one of the types of Protestant churches, and honestly, I remember sitting in that church. It was a long sermon. It was an Old Testament sermon. Onward, Christian soldiers marching off to war, and Lisa was falling asleep in her dad's lap. But I do remember one curious thing. It was a little before Christmas. I was about 8, and I was standing up in the choir loft because my mother was a beautiful singer, soprano, and I was dressed in a little angel costume, with a coat hanger, on the white thing and a halo. And I thought, I feel like me. This is the real me.
An angel.
An angel. I mean, please, I believe in being humble, so but it did. That's something about the beauty and the purity and the sanctity and the childhood innocence. Jesus always said, "Let the little children come unto me." So anyway, mostly I found going to that church, Sunday school was okay, but it was just kind of boring. I later actually went back to that church in rural Virginia. It's a place called Hampton-Sydney College, a men's college in the middle of Prince Edward County. And I didn't feel anything, which was very strange because I have felt some things. I'm not going to share all of it with you. I've had some spiritual experiences that have been incredibly powerful. Unbelievable love, unbelievable peace. I would say I'm a spiritual person precisely because I've had experiences. I can't deny them. They're like more real than this room, more real than this body. It's very odd, this idea of psychology and what Dr. Timoni said. She got my line. When I was in college, I went to Florida State. I wanted to be an actor, actually, when I was 12. Julia Roberts' father, Walter Roberts, had an acting group called Actors and Writers Workshop in Atlanta. So for a couple of years, I was playing roles. Bluebeard's last wife was my last role. And anyway, so I decided to go to Florida State because Florida State had a good acting program. But something happened to me when I was a teenager, and I thought, I want to find out who I am. I don't just want to play roles. So there was this interest in the deep, subject matter, who am I, deeply as a human being. So when I went to Florida State, they had a religion department. Now, I was looking again, as she said, took my lines, for what makes people tick. And I used that same language. So I tried psychology, and I thought, not quite deep enough. And I tried biology, and I thought, okay, psychobiology, we're going deeper. Then I took a chemistry class, and I said, uh-oh, not my thing. Numbers and, no, that's not the essence I'm looking for. So I happened to take a religion class. It was called Religion and Literature, the Novel. Now, this was a very curious time in American history. They thought that the church's religion was dying, completely and utterly dying, right? It's called Death of God movement. So they were Death of God theologians. And my professor teaching that course was a Death of God theologian. He just thought, he had us read, about the concentration camps and people losing their faith. And we read Waiting for Godot. And he got really angry with me because I wrote a paper on Waiting for Godot, and I suggested, who knows, that Godot is actually God. He got really angry. He said, no, can't be God.
But that's what made you study religion. Exactly.
So what I felt was, I feel like humans are layered beings. If you go deeper in a human being than the body, you get to the subconscious mind, you get to the unconscious mind. And Hinduism actually has 4 bodies and 4 states. And if you go deep beneath your waking state, deep beneath your dreams, deep beneath the deep sleep dreamless state, you find the soul. You find light, you find joy, you find beauty. And I have experienced that in dreams. And once in very, very deep meditation, this was actually Hindu yoga tradition. So, you know, people change over time. That's what you think, oh, what am I going to be in life? But you find that your interests circle around, cycle around, change, develop. We are ever-changing people. So anyway, I took a course called, I became a religion major, and I just felt it's the depth of it. It was this, I can't describe it, like you've touched your core. That's all I can say. I mean, and these were not particularly social classes, although one of my very favorite classes as an undergraduate was about this Christian doctrine, where Constantine held the Council of Nicaea, and they duped it out. You know, who is Jesus? Is he human? Is he an angel? Is he God? Is he like something else? Is he a prophet? Like, what the heck is he? And Constantine stood up in the 4th century and said, I'm going to tell you who he is. The doctrines, you know, like the Trinity. God is one substance in 3 persons. This is, again, interesting doctrinal Christian history. Where do you think the Council of Nicaea came? It didn't come from Jesus. It came from Emperor Constantine, the first Roman emperor in the 4th century to convert to Christianity. So you go in the 4th century from Christianity being, hey, this is a cult where people are drinking blood and eating the body of their saint. Oh, weird. And they come back to life after they die, you know. So the Roman soldiers were a little bit afraid, you know, that maybe if they kill somebody that, you know. Anyway, it's a long story. I ended up going to India. I've been in India for about 4 years, you know, and it's very hard to come back after being there for 2 years. It's like your head is like turned into, because I went back in the hinterland, back to, you know, anthropological research, and studied egg grew in the monastery in the community, lived with the family. They had 11 children.
And this was when you did your graduate work, right?
Yeah.
That's when
This was my PhD dissertation work. I had a master's at Princeton, but they didn't have enough in my area, so I moved to Penn to get my PhD. So you got to follow what you need. They had a South Asia Regional Studies program. And this is too long of a story, but let me just say that I have circled around from this idea of like finding this deep experience to, I'm very interested in Mahatma Gandhi and how is he living his deep, deep, deep faith in social action, in nonviolence, in satyagraha, in, you know, political and social action. So I end up where, you know, in the public arena, morality, but deep spirituality, but social action and influence on Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and social justice. So I'm circling around, and now I have more respect for scriptures. They're like depth charges. There's experience at the heart of scriptures. So I will shut up.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to do a couple of backtrackings. Dr. Clatterbuck, I'm extremely jealous that you actually went to school or played soccer with baseball players' kids. And sports is always an exception. I always prayed over sports, even though we weren't religious. So a reference that Dr. Vail had made, actually, Brown v. Board, I don't know how much that religious history, we talked about this in Religion and Law last spring. Brown v. Board was the desegregation case.
Board of Education.
Yeah, Brown v. Board of Education was the desegregation case in the mid-1950s. And Dr. Vail lived in the county that decided not to have public schools anymore rather than integrate. So that was part of her history, that's second nature to her to just describe. But to the rest of us, that's like, whoa, are you kidding me? So that's part of the religious influence along the way. So I'd like to move now to what the main part of why we're here is, right? The real question is the religious imagination. So I'd like each of us to take a couple of minutes to talk about what the religious imagination means to each of us, right? And I don't think I will start this one. I think other people might have more creative ways to describe it. But if you want me to start, I will. Anybody want to go first?
I'll be happy.
In a couple of minutes for each of us, just a couple.
Remove the pressure for you, Dorothy. So for my work, imagination and imaginative acts are fundamental. Because when we act religiously, in my opinion, we act in a world of our perception, but we act through a lens that's provided to us by our religious traditions, by practices, by scriptures, and just by generally other people who have told us how to act. Using a template, being given this understanding of how the world should look and the way that the world ought to be, and then dealing with the world in all of its complexities where we see that it is not like that, that seems to me to be what inspires religious action. When I look at religious worlds, I see an absolute conflation of the symbolic and the real. So where we can't pull those apart anymore, where the real becomes seen as the same as our symbolic ideas. And so my work specifically looks particularly at authority structures and how authority is constructed and legitimated by these symbolic systems. And the work of my dissertation was on martyrdom specifically. And so I was faced with these people who were so attached to this symbolic, imaginative world that they were operating through, and then confronted with other imaginative worlds that did not vibe with the world they were working on, that they decided it was better for them to end their life rather than change that perspective, change that perception. And I couldn't think of anything more powerful and anything more potent than these stories, particularly through narratives, that give us an understanding of our own relationship with ourselves, who we're supposed to be, what our goals should be, as well as what are our responsibilities to others, and how do we determine those things. And those questions, the question of who am I and who are we and what should we be doing, are the greatest existential questions we can encounter. But being given an understanding of here's what they should be, here's who you should be. Who should you be? You should be a Christian. You should be a Muslim. You should be a Hindu. And being those things carries with it certain requirements of action and requirements of behavior. And so when I look at religion, religion itself is just a word that we give to these broad-scale, widespread, symbolic understandings of our world that people enact into reality. So once people act in the ways that are guided by this imagination that can be defined or shaped by religion, the distinction between the symbolic and the real completely goes away. We have to attend to what these people said they were doing, why they said they were doing it, and then deal with the consequences of those actions. So for me, when I imagine this question, what is the religious imagination? It's what allows people to articulate a vision of social order, of political order, of personal order, and even this transcendent cosmic order that can give shape to and be seen as an authority above any worldly or temporal structures that we have. So for me, religious imagination is central to understanding action in the world.
Okay, so thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, there are certain
How's my
moments.
time?
There are certain moments when you have to say, "Whoa, I need to hold on to the table here." This is like reading the existentialist. So I think as you closed up what you said it's a way that religion is a way of articulating a vision of order, personal order, social order, community order, political order, and cosmic order. Right? Order with a capital O. Order. You know, you hear the boom of the heavens. Right?
Yeah, it's extremely deep. Extremely deep.
Yeah, but religion also conflates the symbolic and the real as we think about what the world ought to be. So I think we'll let all that sink into our heads.
Take a minute.
And now the next person think of, now I'm afraid I can't even come close to this, right?
You didn't want to
So
go
well
first.
articulated. I didn't. Now I don't think I want to go at all now. Anybody else want to take a turn?
I'll go after you.
Well, there's a philosopher, Paul Ricoeur, who's a French philosopher who taught for many years at the University of Chicago, and he did a lot of work with hermeneutics and interpretation theory and symbol theory. But he talked about, one of the roles of religion is that it helps us to understand new ways of being in the world. And that phrase, new ways of being in the world, I think is such an important concept in understanding the role of religion in society. And one of the ways I think we can frame this is through the prophetic imagination, which is sort of a tradition within religious communities where we know about prophets, right, and sort of jokes about prophets and prophets of doom and gloom and that sort of thing. But really, the prophetic imagination, I think, is that impulse within religious communities and religious traditions that essentially imagines what the world or imagines what society could look like, but doesn't yet. Right? Imagines what society could look like, but doesn't in our experience of it. And whether we look at the ancient Hebrew prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Daniel, back 500, 400 BCE, or up into the tradition of Jesus, who very much understood himself within that ancient Hebrew, the Jewish prophetic tradition of saying, the world is not the way it should be yet, but could be, or even in Christian traditions today. Liberation theology is a sort of a stream within Christianity that addresses specifically challenges of injustice in society, whether that's Latin American liberation theology or Black theology in the U.S. liberation theology, or feminist theology or queer theology, that basically challenges systems of injustice and oppression from a religious perspective and says we can do better than this. And so I think that's another way that religion helps us to imagine the world differently than it is, and sort of has the audacity to challenge us to let's try to realize that different world.
Okay. So to recap, Dr. Clatterbuck, the prophetic imagination, prophet as in Prophet, not profit making like in our capitalist world.
The opposite.
Just in case, really the opposite. And I once said to my husband, we're an interfaith family, I said we should focus on the prophets at the winter, Hanukkah, Christmas time. And he said, you mean prophet or profit? Because it's so capitalistic. But the prophetic imagination helps us think about what society could look like but doesn't yet. And that plays itself out in things like liberation thought and feminist thought too. That's a good point. Okay, good. So we're still pondering.
I just have a couple of things to add. So so those are excellent ways of understanding the religious imagination, and the only thing that I would add are just 2 quick points. And so one of them is, my area is religion and genocide. And so often when we're looking at things like religious imagination in that context, we are looking at issues of what does society or what does the polity look like now? And this is the rubric under which I'll maybe put our comments, which is this idea of envisioning a possibility, right? So religious imagination allows us to envision possibilities. And so that possibility can be not only what we already know and reconfiguring it, or so in that sense you're using your imagination to reconfigure that which already exists, or imagination in the sense of coming up with something completely new, right? So actually St. Thomas Aquinas talks about imagination in this way, this idea of reconfiguring that with which we're already familiar. So like a unicorn, for instance, a unicorn basically is parts of an animal that already exist that you're reconfiguring in some new way. Or you can actually come up with something that doesn't exist in reality as we understand it, like a chimera, right? That's something you have to imagine because it doesn't exist in this world.
I have a unicorn toy.
Do you really?
Stuffed
See?
animal.
So she has one. And so in that way, kind of envisioning possibilities about what society could look like. And this is important specifically in genocide because oftentimes the group that's being targeted is an imagined religious community if they're being targeted for that purpose, in the sense that it exists in the minds of the perpetrators what kind of threat that group poses. But it's also important when it comes to forgiveness and envisioning a society that could put itself back together after such trauma, what the religious impetus could be for imagining that kind of possibility. And we'll get probably more into this as we talk a bit more about how religion can play a role not only positively in imagining a world, but also sometimes in ways that can be destructive. The other quick point that I'll make is that, and I think that Dr. Vail will appreciate this quick point, is also not thinking of the religious imagination only as kind of envisioning possibilities, but also in the sense of being inspired by something, by the sacred, in creative projects. And so, for instance, think about the types of art that are inspired or motivated by divine or by sacred kind of commitments. Or thinking about things like natural theology, which was a sense of trying to understand or uncover the mind of God through scientific research, right? So this sense of how our imagination, and Dr. Clatterbuck's going to make fun of me, is quickened. How our imagination is stirred, right, by religious sacred motivation is another way you can think of the religious imagination.
And just as a note, we talked about how we should describe how the religious imagination is sparked or triggered. And Kate had used the word quickened, and we said nobody uses the word quickened anymore. So we had a verbal dispute about how well do we know the word quickened. I like it. I do like it.
Has anyone in this room used the word quicken in the past year? Ben, okay.
Okay.
So at this point,
All right.
We're in, yes, small company.
Dr. Vale, do you want to say a few words?
You know, what's amazing to me is a lot of people think religion is about a once a week, visit to a house of worship. And if you're in a religion department, you're wanting to be a pastor or a priest. And it's just not like that. For me, I think everybody comes from their own experience. And for me, like I said, I actually have had some experiences. And it so powerfully impacted me that this idea that it's coming from the deepest inside spiritual part of me. So I was interested in religious experience, as Dr. Clatterbuck is. I was reminded when this idea of this panel came up. A book I read in graduate school in the master's part of it at Princeton. And there's a book by Henri Corbin called Creative Imagination in the Sufism of Ibn Arabi. Now, I haven't read that book for years, but I was profoundly impacted by that. It was so beautiful, and it could have just been because he was a lovely writer, sometimes it's just... But I also love the Sufi tradition. It's the Islamic mystic tradition, and Dr. Ibrahim, who's not here, also loves the Sufi tradition. I teach it. It's the last thing I do in my Religions of the World course is talk about the Sufi saints and poets, inspired out of love, love, love. Now, everybody's different. What is it that I have felt I need to do in this life? Find more love within myself and spread it and use it and help all of my students, give to my community, help my world. And so, of course, I got interested in Mahatma Gandhi. What he said he wanted. I want God more than anything else. He said, I'm a Hindu and I love Jesus and I love, the New Testament, but I don't particularly like the Old Testament. And, he read Tolstoy and he read Ruskin and he read, Thoreau, who went to jail, remember, for breaking the law. And so this idea of self-rule ended up being, for him, multi-leveled, multi-layered. And as you know, I just said I'm interested in that part. How are we multi-leveled, multi-layered? What is your deepest, deepest wish? What is your deepest, deepest hope? So this idea, for me, the Sufis write poems using the nightingale and the rose to talk about love of God, to talk about, how much are you willing to give up for the love of God? The saint called Al-Hallaj, who was a carter by trade, began having this experience. On al-Haq, I am the truth. On al-Haq, I am the truth. The authorities put him in jail. He got hung, drawn, and quartered, and his eyes gouged out, and every drop of blood that came out of his body, by the way, he did mention Jesus. He said, I could get out of prison, but I'm not going to. Every drop of blood that came out of his body said, I am the truth. I am the truth. And interestingly, one way that it differs from Jesus' story, it said that he experienced no pain. But the devil was right underneath the place where he was getting hung and said, why didn't you keep quiet? Like most Sufis. Why in the world are you shouting it to the rooftops? And he said, well, he felt like he had to do it, the sense of vocation. Gandhi had a tremendously powerful sense of vocation. He wasn't having mystical experiences, but he felt guided, supremely guided. And he was like the spiritual man who then wider said, discipline your life, wash your own clothes. I mean, stop being so lazy, right? And you don't have to spend all your money on fancy food. And, he simplified his life and began working for society after he got thrown off a train in South Africa for racial, social reasons. He called nasty names. What are you doing in first class? And he said, I have a first class ticket. I'm a lawyer. I got my law degree in London. The British were in control of India and South Africa, imperialism. They did do some good things, in terms of laws and, but basically as the 19th century came along, they got more and more racist, more and more nasty about Indians, these brown people, and we're so much superior, and so ultimately quit India. India took back its rights, as a sovereign people. Gandhi said there's only one thing worse than violence. Talked about nonviolence. Only one thing worse: not respecting yourself, not thinking you're worth anything. He said that's worse. If you feel completely powerless, be violent. But he was assuming, he always said, respect yourself. Respect, what's that song? Respect yourself. So at the moment, I'm teaching this Hinduism/Gandhi course, and we're talking about Gandhi, and I'm having a wonderful time with my students. I hope they're enjoying it too.
Thank you. So I want to recap a little bit. Kate saying you see religious imagination as envisioning a possibility of what we know and could reconfigure or cast completely anew. And you also, though, tied in genocide and forgiveness as being able to, that's something that I think is very interesting, that a lot of what we see about religion right now is really bad news, of really frightening, I think probably horrible people doing horrifying things, right? And there are some theologians along the way who have said that we need to understand suffering of others. Dietrich Bonhoeffer is one example of that. He was a Protestant theologian, minister, who was involved in the resistance against Hitler and was hanged 2 weeks before the concentration camp he was condemned to was liberated. So imagining, out of all of the suffering, being able to imagine a better world and still have faith, that's something that many of us can't quite understand. We just sort of stand in awe and say, oh wow, congratulations to you, I don't understand how you can do that. But Dr. Timony, in her study of genocide, has looked also at reconciliation committees. How can we envision a new, revived community after the horrors that have happened here? And then Dr. Vail, again, because, Dr. Vail is teaching the Gandhi course this semester. How do we use religious imagination to deepen our experience, look at the creative imagination through the Sufi tradition, through mysticism.
Poets.
And poets,
Love
yeah.
poets.
And also all of the arts that have inspired religion. I know one theology professor I studied with, one class, had said, look at what religion creates. If it creates beauty, then it's valuable. And there's a lot of beauty out there created by and for religion. Maybe that helps. So my bit of a contribution to this, I don't really feel quite equipped, because I don't feel like I'm a very creative person. And I'm going to actually invoke Søren Kierkegaard, the great Danish philosopher of religion, who wrote extensively on silence. And sometimes I think all we can do is stand in awe, maybe use metaphor to try to analogize to what the creative, what the religious imagination is, what the hope and prophetic vision is. But maybe silence is the only way to really address it. That's all I have to remain silent. That's all. So I'd like to now move to what we're already starting to allude to and start to engage. Does religion help us imagine a better world? And maybe we should address in tandem, does religion help us realize, that is, make happen, bring into effect a better world? Does religion help us imagine a better world? Does religion help us realize a better world? I will sort of start this one off and say, I do think that religion helps us imagine a better world. But as somebody who doesn't feel particularly spiritual, I study it because it's interesting, like many aspects of society, many constructs of thought, they're interesting. And I know in my own personal life, we were singing at the synagogue that my family attends. I go to 2 different religious organizations. It's very fun. too much religion in my life, but it's very fun. And there was one song, it was sort of a modern rendition of an old Hebrew tune, Hashkivenu. And the English lyrics said, one day, we'll make the world a better place, that kind of lyrics. And I actually feel very frustrated with that song. So many people think it's beautiful and encouraging and inspiring and promising. And I just think, yeah, they were singing that 50 years ago. I actually grew up listening to the peace and love music of the 60s, a little kid, like, I'd like to teach the world to sing. And I realized this past year, with all of the nasty politics going on, that as a child, I really thought we were going to solve those world's problems.
Dawning at the age of Aquarius.
The age of Aquarius, absolutely. I thought we were going to solve those world's problems. So when I hear this Hashkivenu with a hopeful line being repeated, I just feel frustrated because I think 50 years ago we thought that. 30 years before that we thought that. After the end of slavery we thought that. In periods past, we have had these moments when people say, oh, well, just wait. It will get better. And I'm not very satisfied with that, to be honest. So yes, religion helps us imagine a better world, and I think as an individual, I'm very happy to embrace goodness and try to be the best I can and do the nice things and like my friends' Facebook memes that are promising. And the problem is the Buddha says, you think you have time? I'm like, yes, that's so a problem. But does it help us realize a better world? I think it definitely could, but I get very frustrated with people who are really part of what I think of as nothing more than a religious political cult killing people in the name of their religion. That makes no sense to me, and that really saddens me. I find it actually heartbreaking that people misuse religion. So I think religion could help us realize a better world, and I'm still waiting because there's still part of that 7-year-old in me who's saying I'd like to teach the world to sing, maybe we can get there. I have a lot of faith in the interfaith movement, actually. In our Women in Religion class, we're reading the women mystics primarily, because in the standard traditions, they tend to be more conservative. They wouldn't let women read and study and write. But in the mystical traditions, they could invoke God's authority and say, but God has inspired me. So they wrote a lot of very, very inspiring works, and they transcended the particularity of their religion. That I think there's hope for. Okay, but I'll leave it to the rest of you to give your thoughts on the matter.
Can I?
Yes, of course, Dr. Baldwin, please.
I just want to interject one thing that occurred to me when Dorothy was speaking. And I guess I don't think I made it very clear earlier. I've spent the last 6 years going around this entire university having these symposia every spring on different types of imagination. And so I've made the stops in all the different colleges, CSAM, business school, arts, and so forth. But now I see why this stop is the most meaningful one, because of the word transcendence that has come up a couple of times. I think that's something I want to interject, because you can go around to all the different subject areas, if you will, at a university. University is made up of many component parts, and there's over 300 majors in this university. And I've had an opportunity to meet with people and listen to people from across the campus, but this is the most, of all the symposia that we've had, I'm not just saying that because I'm sitting here, but this is the one that this is the first time the word transcendent has even been mentioned.
Thank you.
That's my 2 cents. Now we go back to
Thank
Go
you.
to scheduled.
For a schedule, for a regularly scheduled
Now, and
programming.
I would like to interject something. I'm not one of the students. I'm Dr. Ray. I run the director of the Coach Institute around the corner.
Dr. Marianne Ray, Cocha Institute,
Thank
Italian, of the Italian experience.
Well, I've become such a fan of the religious department programs that, I'm not here because I've got nothing else to do tonight. I have to sign in. But all I'm saying is that I just want to second your second, because I've been totally amazed by the the depth, the quality, and all these, and it's so frustrating to me, you have those fabulous little brown bag discussions, why isn't the room jam-packed with people? So maybe now you're creating a new audience, but anyway, I just had to put that, my 2 cents in, I'm a sociologist.
And you're reminding me that we need to make sure to leave time for questions for
Yeah.
people. So,
Okay.
other people want to comment on, does religion help us imagine a better world and realize a better world?
One of the things on my wish list for a new faculty member is science and religion. The question of, when I see like scientists working at the cellular level and deeper, and I see them talking about dark energy and cosmology and, things that, and I see the Eastern religions talking about a big explosion or just one energy becoming 2, becoming 3. And I'm thinking, man, religion and science. And so I just got a whole course, how you do the Western religions, religion and science, religion moving away from science ultimately, and then the Eastern religions, they're going in tandem. The one becomes the 10, 100,000, million things in the world. Religion and science, to me, is really, really exciting. And I'd love to work with the biologists and the astrophysicists, the cosmologists, and to me, it's about truth. There is truth in religion. It's not just a conception necessarily. There's something, I don't know what it is. You can call it God, you can call it a power. I've experienced something. It was love, it was light, so did I imagine it all? I don't think so. Like I said, it seemed more real than this room, than myself, So this question of who are we, what's our identity, is a crucial one for all of us. And that identity is always changing, but is there something that remains constant? What do you really, really care about? I think what can work is each one of us can develop ourselves. Confucius called it self-cultivation. Gandhi called it my experiment with truth. Each one of us can make ourselves more moral, more righteous, more good, more caring toward others, and deeper in thought. Whether you're religious or an atheist, it really doesn't matter. You can be a better and better person if you want to. You can be your own psychiatrist, psychologist. You can be your, anyway.
Okay, yeah, that's so you're saying at the very least it will make us better ourselves.
Yeah.
I definitely don't want to go last because I'm not going to be the upper of the group. I study religious violence. I have to study people that take their religion and make the world a worse place, in our estimation. And one of the things that it really enforced upon me was, first of all, religion itself doesn't do anything. Religion doesn't act. We act religiously, and it's always based on our interpretation of the religion that we follow. So I think the question of does religion help us imagine or realize a better world revolves around the fact of how is religion interpreted in different places, because we have to come to terms with the fact that our understanding not only of religion but what a better world looks like varies radically across the globe. And a large part of that variance comes from the radically different contexts that we live in. We can sit here in this very privileged seat in the West and say, well, yes, we should come together. We should come together globally. We should recognize all people as worthwhile and with their own intrinsic value. But that's not always how religion gets interpreted. And for me, the important thing is we need to remember trying to change the world shouldn't start with religion. It should start with changing the context wherein religion is interpreted. If we make those contexts better, if we can show other people anywhere in the world that there is benefit to this, then we can encourage interpretation along these lines. Because religion does provide an ideal world. That's a large part of how it works. It says there is justice, there is love, there is truth. But it has to be enacted. And so we can have an ideal world, but religion's always trying to catch up. It's always trying to deal with the now, and we're taking these texts and these ideas that have long traditions, which is why we like them and why we think they're worthwhile, but we have to try to attend it to today's circumstances, and those circumstances largely determine not only what we think of as religion, but what we think of as a better world.
Thank you.
Can I just say one thing? Okay.
Just one quick thing. I'm thinking this next Monday in the Hinduism Gandhi course of comparing Adolf Hitler and Gandhi. Opposites, maybe? We'll see.
Like a teaser.
I was just going to add that, I guess one way of answering the question, does religion help us realize, or does it help us imagine and then realize a better world? A really simplistic way of answering that, I think, would be to say good religion does, and bad religion doesn't. And the way that John has kind of framed it, is this question of, well, part of the problem and the conflicts and contradictions within religions is that different religious communities have such radically different ideas of what a better world looks like, and sometimes directly contradictory visions, right? So for some religious communities, a better world means a place where immigrants are welcomed with open arms and everyone has access to affordable health care. And others who feel like, well, a better world would be where women have fewer opportunities and where, trans individuals aren't allowed to openly express their gender identity and how they understand themselves. And so, well, what do you do with that? And I think one of the responsibilities that I think that's really an urgent responsibility for religious communities to sort of wrestle with is to take responsibility for the way that their own religious communities are in fact perpetuating oppressive circumstances and are perpetuating injustice. And I think it's really easy sometimes for a Christian, for example, to when someone who identifies as a Christian, say attacks a trans individual, to say, well, that's not real Christianity. That's not true Christianity. Or in the case of in honor killing within a religious tradition, for someone to say, well, that's not real Islam. That's not true Islam. I really think that for whatever your tradition is, I think that's too easy just to sort of wipe your hands clean and say, well, that's not real Christianity, that's not real Hinduism, that's not real Islam. That on some level, I think individuals, leaders, lay people within religious communities actually have to take responsibility for the ways that their own religious traditions are being co-opted in violent ways and in unjust ways, and wrestle with that head on and think about what scriptures perhaps are perpetuating these injustices, what theologies within our tradition are actually perpetuating these injustices, and somehow take account of that internally. So maybe that was the downer for the evening, I don't know, but I think that's really important.
Religion and genocide, that's a pretty big
Oh
downer
my
as
gosh, it's
well.
getting worse.
So
Lift us up.
I'll try to end on a happier note if I can. But yes, just two quick points that I also wanted to dovetail is that we do often get into spots of trouble when we start talking about imagining a better world, when we have competing ideas of what that better world should look like. So one point that I'm sure many of you will take away from this is that, if nothing else, religion provides an opportunity for establishing a kind of worldview and how we function in the world. And this is the point that was being made earlier, is that religion in and of itself, as Dr. Sabulsi said, doesn't do anything on its own. It doesn't have a will. It's something that human beings then use in ways that are useful to them. And so it can imagine a better world, but because of the issues of ultimacy that are often involved, because of the power that it has, it can lead to very destructive kinds of competitions between what that better world should look like. But also, I wanted to highlight that when we talk about something maybe on a more positive note about how it can actually be enacted, is that, again, going back to, I like St. Thomas Aquinas, I just do, is that he does have this connection among the intellect, the imagination, and then the will, specifically in actions, right? So there's this idea that even our own intellect in some ways is dependent upon our ability to imagine, and then that we use that as a way of trying to understand how we actualize that in the world. And so two very concrete ways in which religion can actually aid in making the world a better place is that people who are a part of religious communities often are a ready-made network of people that can make change in the world because they are already kind of like-minded and they are an intact group of people that may leverage some power for good. And so, for instance, in my work in genocide, I'm often trying to figure out how can intact religious communities who already have perhaps some kind of commitment to nonviolence or some kind of commitment to actualizing the way the world ought to be, how can that be leveraged in ways that can actually make the world a better place? And then second, religious traditions often express some dissatisfaction either with the human condition or with the state of the world as it exists. Or establishes some sense of obligation that we have in maintaining the world. And so if you start from that kind of seat within how we understand religion, then it does allow us to try to articulate for ourselves and in our communities, how are we going to engage the world in a way that is going to make it a better place. And having something like the sacred, or having something like the spirit world, or having something like the divine, or having something like a commitment beyond just our immediate selves and our reality can be the kind of sustaining power that people need to actualize things that are positive. So if you look at the abolitionist movement, right? If you look at civil rights, if you look at these, in my class, I apologize for being late, and I was actually teaching my Holocaust class, which several of my students are here, and we were talking about the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses were a group that resisted the Nazis, right? And so because of their commitment. And so we can certainly see how these competing ideologies can be destructive, but we can also see how intact groups and religious communities can actually bring about change in very real and very palpable ways.
Yeah, thank you. So that ends up being our wonderful hold on to your seat, think about it way to close out this discussion. Dr. Timony points out that if you think about the way that religion can provide opportunities for establishing a worldview, which could be how do we repair the evils of this world? How do we reconcile a community that's been destroyed by violence?